The Aquest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.
Hello, podcast listeners, and welcome to this episode of the Aquest Podcast with me, Danny Lawler. In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Brian Walsh, who's the CEO of Reitigh. Reitigh is a fintech company, and Brian is too modest to claim to be an expert on artificial intelligence, but he does know rather a lot about it, and certainly a lot more than I do, and a lot more than probably most people in the financial services industry do. Now, AI is something that comes up as a topic of conversation and a topic at conferences again and again and again these days. And I thought it would be very useful to talk to somebody who has the kind of knowledge and insight that Brian does. Because when I hear AI being talked about, the views vary from the very positive to the very negative. They vary from it's going to take all of our jobs to it's very expensive and it doesn't work to it's just a fad and it'll go the same way as a lot of other fads. Again, as I said, I thought it'd be useful to pick Brian's brains on the topic of AI, try to get through some of the terminology and some of the mythology and have a better understanding of what it is, what it does, what it doesn't do, and whether it's going to put us all out of a job. So on that note, let's get on with the episode.
The Aquest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.
Hi, Brian. Welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks for having me.
Am I right to describe you as an AI expert?
An AI expert. Wow, that's putting all the pressure on me at the start. I know a few things, and we'll see where we get to.
Oh, only a true expert would deny their expertise. So our conversation is going to be about AI, artificial intelligence. I grew up on a dairy farm in the 80s, and AI meant something quite different, but that's another discussion. AI, artificial intelligence, though, it seems to be everywhere these days. Every conference has some time dedicated to it. I see this quarter's AIMA journal. 3 of the first 5 articles are all about AI. So it's something that's coming up again and again. I guess you must see that as well, Brian, in your role. Clients asking you about how you use AI or do you use AI?
Yeah, I think the financial services has been at the forefront of AI, and that is not common for new technologies that get launched. Oftentimes, financial services will adopt technologies, but they won't be the leader in adopting technologies. And one of the main reasons that financial services has been at the forefront of AI, in particularly large language models, is the volume of unstructured information that is inside financial services. And by unstructured, I mean text that's in PDF files. And loads of the funds industry is built on custom written text documents. So if we look at liquid markets, there's supplements, there's prospectuses, there's all sorts of things that are completely bespokely written per fund. And on the private side or the alternative side, there's a huge rise in private credit agreements, private debt agreements, there's private equity agreements. There's enormous volumes of unstructured data. And that's really a sweet spot of where large language models can come in and start understanding that and turning that into structured things that can be used inside systems and databases.
And you add to that the raft of policies and procedures that regulations like to impose. And that's a lot of paper, well, PDF files, I guess, these days, that contains information that people in a business are expected to know.
Absolutely huge volumes. And that's really one of the sweet spots of AI, where AI and large language models can come in and start to consume that information and use it in a much faster and more efficient way than having people having to read that.
And I guess when I think about how deep the financial services rule books are, particularly, it seems to me a pretty much impossible task for a business to stay on top of those rule books without some form of assistance, because otherwise you're just bound to trip up somewhere, because as I said, the rule books are so deep.
Exactly. And I think assistance is the key word there, because AI is not replacing the people. It is there to assist the people. And I think that's a lot of criticism that I see from AI publicly is stemming from that people have been led to believe for one reason or another that AI is a super intelligence that's coming in to replace them. Whereas at least today, the state of AI technology that you can leverage requires a person to be in the loop. So human in the loop, as we call it, where the AI can go out and analyze documents or data and can produce insights and outputs, but those insights and outputs need to be reviewed by people. So the mental model that I think it's very important to have a mental model for how to think about how AI can be applied to your business. And the one that I find works best for me is the idea of AI as an army of interns, where you can go out and give the AI a task to do. You don't need to give it explicit instructions on, I need you to do A, B, C, and D, but you can give it a general direction on what to do and the type of output that you want, and the AI will go and achieve that. And the power really comes from the fact that you essentially have an unlimited number of those interns that you can send out to do work. But in the same way that when you get an intern to do work, you need to supervise the response, the output that the intern comes up with.
And this is where training comes in, I guess. Good analogy then with interns.
It's training is probably so a lot of large language models, like training is the kind of pre-trained coming up with how the probability model works that kind of OpenAI or Microsoft or Facebook or Google have come up with. I think it's more nuanced than that you're essentially customizing the instructions in the prompt, as they call it. So it's like prompt engineering. So the bit that you have control over is what you're asking the model to do, not really training. I think training is giving an impression that when I go out and talk to people and people think that it's training, they think that, well, when I do enough training, it's going to be 100% right. Whereas the technology that's there today, you can hone your prompt to make it better, but it's still underlying a probability model that is going to get some things wrong that requires a human in the loop.
And the probability then is, that's how you design the model or design the AI to pull out the information that it's taking its best guess is what you're looking for.
Exactly. Like at a really fundamental level, what large language models do is they try to predict the next word in a sequence. So if I said to you a sentence like, Brian didn't have breakfast this morning, he is feeling very, and I asked you to predict what the next word is going to be, you're going to say the next word is something like hungry or grumpy or tired or something along those lines. And that is essentially what the AI is doing in a large language model. It's predicting what the next word in a sequence of words is. And instead of using human intuition and English understanding of what all the words mean, it is using the relationships between all words that it has ever seen in the history of all text on the internet on how words are related together. So it doesn't understand what the words breakfast and hungry mean. More so, it has seen the words didn't have breakfast and the words hungry in other text in the past. And the probability model has built up to say those words are associated together. The most likely next word is hungry, and the second most likely next word is tired, and so on.
Financial services are industry, so let's focus on it. So financial services firms are reasonably good or certainly reasonably active in this space. How good is the technology now? Is it something that firms can deploy and be confident that it's going to do what it's supposed to do? Is it still very early stage, or what's your assessment?
So there are huge successes that you can get and huge benefits that you can get to your business using the technology that is there today. I would say there's probably two sides of the hype cycle. There are some people out there that are selling magic beans that are never going to turn into beanstalks. And on the other side, there are people who think that AI and large language models are a fad in the way that we've seen a lot of other technological fads that have had a large amount of promise but haven't delivered, things like blockchain and the metaverse and so on. Whereas I think it's more about understanding the capabilities and the limitations. So if you go in with your eyes open and say, well, AI can perform a lot of tasks, but I'm going to have to review the output of those tasks, there's a huge amount of benefit that you can achieve. And you should be able to achieve that with very little investment of both capital and time, and you should start achieving returns quite quickly.
Because one of the criticisms that I hear, and I'm absolutely no expert in it, but is, and maybe it's got to do with an alignment of expectations, but a sense that AI is going to be a game-changing development for a business in terms of efficiencies. They plow a lot of time and effort and money into it, and they find that actually what they're getting out the other side of it isn't what they had hoped, and they're actually no further along.
So I think that's how you manage change in general. So AI and large language models are an emerging technology that I think everyone is still trying to figure out exactly the role that they will play. But for all change, you should implement it in small chunks where you are getting benefits and learning things and iterating through that. It's like the analogy of how do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat an elephant a bite at a time. Whereas if your approach to implementing AI is I'm going to bring in a large big name consulting company and spend 6 figures on how do I AI-ify my business, that is not going to work very well. Whereas if you identify small use cases, you build small examples of using AI to solve those, and you will learn something doing that, and you can leverage the benefits that you've gotten from that work to sprawl out into the rest of the business. And that's the approach that successful companies that are doing this are taking.
Is it a fad?
Is it a fad? No, not at all. No. I think that there's a couple of differences between other technologies that have turned out to be fads. So if we look at things like blockchain, which I think has had some niche use cases, but by and large has not had the promise that a lot of expensive consultants that went into companies hasn't delivered on that. Number one is that you don't need a network to achieve value using AI and large language models. Whereas a lot of other technologies like blockchain, like you couldn't be the only person on a decentralized ledger. Whereas you can be in the corner on your AI model and doing analyzing data and getting value from it in a way that you don't need the entire world to have already adopted it to get better. It's also incredibly cheap to have small use cases and try things out. Like calls to AI APIs to get output back are on the orders of cents. You're paying a few cents per call to get value. So you can go and experiment and try things. And maybe that's something that large enterprises sometimes find difficult, that kind of experimentation phase. But that's, I think, where companies need to focus. How do I become more agile? How do I try things in a smaller way, in a faster way, see what works and see what benefit I can get, and then use those learnings to see how I can apply things to the rest of the business.
And forgive my ignorance here, Brian, but I assume that the AI models that firms might deploy are built elsewhere and that they basically buy in that technology for their own use and then adapt it as they need, as opposed to building this thing from scratch.
Exactly. So all of the energy and the expense in building the model is in training the model. It's in working out those probabilities of the example of, Brian didn't have breakfast. He's feeling very what the probability of how those words are related together is. So you're going to use a mixture of your data combined with the pre-trained model. So essentially the format is that you take your data, so for example, let's say that we wanted to analyze some data inside a fund supplement or prospectus. What we would do is we would take the data inside the fund supplement and prospectus and provide that to the model and say, here is some data that I want to analyze, and ask the model prompts the model for information contained within that text. And that is essentially using the model's understanding of words with the bit of text that I have to get answers coming back. And then you've got issues around, well, where is that data being held? What is that data being used for that you need to consider as well? And that's going to come back to the terms of service and license agreements that you have with those third parties that have produced those models.
And presumably that approach, as you said, is quite cost appropriate. It's not sinking gazillions into tech that may not work for your firm.
No, if you were taking those small use cases and calling APIs using sample data, you should be spending very, very little money. This should not be a capital expense. This should be a small operational expense. And then you can roll that out wider and use it further inside the business, which is obviously going to increase the cost, but still relatively cheap to run.
And presumably if you were a new entrant to, say, financial services, you would be using this from the get-go. So you have that advantage over competitors who are maybe trying to work this into legacy systems.
So I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think that the speed to building and using data inside AI is quite low. There's not an enormous amount of code that needs to be built to interact with the model and to get output, and that you should be able to, even if you're a large financial service company with a lot of technical debt, be able to extract small amounts of data from your existing systems, pass them into the AI models, and get benefit from those. I actually don't think that large volumes of technical debt are going to be a significant hindrance to companies there. And certainly in Reitigh, we've worked with some very large companies to implement some AI models quite quickly.
Well, that's interesting, because you often hear, for example, with banks that, how do you modernize and make a bank technologically savvy? Well, you start a new bank.
Exactly.
But it doesn't sound like that's such a problem when it comes to maybe deploying AI in niche areas.
That's because you're changing the core system of the bank in that case. That you're changing all of the information on how the bank's customers are being maintained and all of the transactions that are going on. Whereas here you're looking to more extend and get additional value from some of the data that the company might have, rather than completely replacing the core admin system.
And so when you use AI in Reitigh, can you just give us a sense for the kind of tasks that you would deploy AI for?
So there's a significant increase in sustainability reporting requirements that are hitting a large number of financial services firms. And a lot of the data that comes along with these sustainability reporting requirements is qualitative data rather than quantitative data. And we can see a trend towards making sustainability related disclosures a core part of annual accounts. So like non-financial reporting directives, things such as CSRD in the EU and other wider accounting changes that have been brought in internationally. So companies it's relatively straightforward to build systems to analyze balance sheets and income statements because they're numbers. So if I want to compare one company's income statement to another company's income statement, I can pull off revenues and gross profits and so on and compare them numerically. Whereas if I am looking at, let's say I'm someone who manages investments for a pension, for pension schemes, and I have outsourced investment to, let's say, 100 sub-investment managers, and now I'm getting diversity, equity, and inclusion reports from all 100 investment managers, and my task is to write a statement on how I've considered DEI inside my investment policies. That's an incredibly hard problem for a human to do. For a human to pick up those 100 DEI reports and summarize and compare and contrast and say, I have investigated the DEI status of everyone in my investment chain. Whereas large language models are very good at doing that. They're essentially the same way that you can compare and multiply numbers together on balance sheets, you can take text out of narrative disclosures and compare and contrast them using large language models. And that's where we see one of the biggest growth areas for Reitigh as a business, that we are able to go in and help companies that have complex supply chains. They have a lot of people at various stages in the supply chain with a lot of disclosures that are written in very, very different ways, all in text, and extract scores or compare and contrast. This is what one company is doing, or do trend analysis over time and say, well, carbon disclosures have become more important in the annual accounts of companies over time, and remuneration policies have become less important.
Wow. Because you're right, that would be a very demanding task for a human to go through 100 reports and identify, extract, and then collate all of that information into something that sounds coherent.
Exactly. That's a really hard task for a human. And the way, like we've gone into a number of companies where they've been trying to gather this information through questionnaires, where the company will send out to all of their counterparties a questionnaire about all of the different sustainability reporting facets that they need to report on. And it can be very hard to get the counterparties to populate those questionnaires. So one of the other things that we've done is that we've gone into organizations and said, well, we'll source all of the publicly available information that your counterparties have produced. We will ask those documents all of the questions. We will populate the questionnaire for you. And then you go back to the counterparty and say, hey, we've populated, this is what we think the answers to the questions on your behalf are. Please sign these off or not, because this is what we're going to use to report on.
And I'm going to guess that the feedback level on the second approach is a lot better than the first, where they're not presented with a blank doc, right?
Yeah, significantly better, and it works very well. Like you're taking a very hard and difficult job from a person that is often a skilled professional. You know, these are investment professionals, because you need a certain level of expert knowledge to go and do this collation. So you're taking someone who's a skilled professional who is doing a really thankless job of reading quite a lot of marketing-led material to answer questions, and you're allowing them now to go into more of an oversight role, where they're able to take the output of the large language model and use all of their expertise to say, well, this is a company that is not doing things as well as this other company, or this company is the leading light, and whether they're going to use that to switch providers, or whether they're going to use that to push providers to say, well, this company X over here is doing this in a much better way. You're helping, you're making people's lives a lot easier. They're going to enjoy their workday a lot more.
And so I guess, although there are benefits, there must be some downsides or some risks associated with the use of AI. And I know in Europe we have the EU AI Act, which came into effect around start of August, and it's working through a transition period. What are the kind of areas then, if you use AI, that you're particularly alert for as being weaknesses or risks?
So there are two things. One is hallucinations. I think the most negative thing that most people talk about the use of AI is the idea of hallucinations. And the way I hear most people talk about this is that hallucination is so by hallucination we mean that you've asked the model something and it has given an incorrect answer. That it has hallucinated an answer that wasn't in the source information that you've passed it in. And the way most people present that is that hallucinations are random, as in, it's X% of answers are hallucinated. Therefore, if I ask 100 questions, I'm going to get X% of them are going to be hallucinations, and that tends not to be the case. If you ask questions in a certain manner, you will not get hallucinations in my experience. So there are certain classes of issue that large language models struggle with, and if you go down those ways of asking poor questions, or you ask questions in a poor way, whether whether or not you ask questions that shouldn't have been asked, or you ask questions in an inappropriate way, you're more likely to get hallucinations. So I think that's more around the skill level of the people generating the prompts and building the questions, right, rather than an inherent thing inside large language models. So certainly the large language model will hallucinate if you ask incorrect questions, you pass in bad data, and that is why you need the human in the loop to review that. But you can minimize those by structuring your prompts in a more appropriate manner and structuring the input data that you're passing in a good way.
And does it hallucinate because it wants to come up with an answer and the answer isn't actually in the text that it has, so it creates an answer?
Essentially, yeah. That is essentially what's happening. That back to the predicting the next word example. Large language models want to predict next word. They want to say what is the most likely next word in a sequence. And if there are no next likely words, it's going to still pick what the most next likely word is, which may be the wrong word to pick. And iterating that over time, it results in an incorrect answer. So yeah, essentially the large language, one of the issues that causes hallucinations is that large language models want to produce answers. So if you ask questions that don't have answers, it will make something up. And there are guardrails that are being put in around that to basically turn every question into two questions. The first question being, is there a valid answer to this question? And then if it says yes, say, well, here, give me the answer to the question. And if it says no, return an answer saying there's no valid answer to this.
So it sounds fixable, hallucinations, and it sounds like you can, if you tailor and understand how to ask the right questions or create the right prompts.
Minimizing the risk rather than fixable. So human in the loop, I think, is an important concept to maintain.
Does it assume that the human in the loop would understand if they read an answer that was hallucinated or incorrect, that they'd know? That
is the challenge. That is the challenge, that sometimes it can seem very convincing. And that is back to, you have the same challenge with reviewing work that has been carried out by interns. Interns will make mistakes that as well. It's not like the alternative of getting people to do the work is faultless either.
Yes.
That identifying incorrect work is sometimes challenging.
And the second issue?
So the second issue is around bias. And I think when most people, like the discussion around bias, I find is sometimes overly simplistic. So when people talk about bias in models, they tend to be talking around the presence of kind of protected classes. So things like gender and age and sexual orientation, physical disabilities, and so on. And I think the first thing that I would say around that is that models most of the time have bias because the data that was fed into them was biased by humans. So you could build a model that the model is generating bias, but the vast majority of time bias is introduced into models because the data that was used to train the model had bias in it. So in the same way that we're training people through DEI training and we're training them to try and spot bias in their daily work, you need to acknowledge that models are going to have that bias in the data that was received into them, and that you can try and identify that using statistical methods and so on. But I think that's only kind of half the challenge, because we make a lot of discernible decisions all the time. Like, I don't go to restaurants that have bad reviews. I'm not biased against restaurants that have bad reviews, but I don't go there because for a purely valid reason. It's not unfair. Whereas bias has an implication of being unfair. And when we look at things that are unfair, that's quite a cultural question then that can evolve over time. So if we look at the Society of Actuaries in Ireland has recently had some working papers written about cancer survivors. So there's a right to be forgotten for cancer survivors, where if you had cancer more than 7 years ago and you go apply for an insurance policy, you do not have to disclose to the insurance company that you had cancer as long as you had it more than 7 years ago. So that's an updating sense of bias, where we have now decided that you are not allowed bias against people that survived cancer more than 7 years ago. And when you look at bias from that perspective, it's an ever-evolving concept that you need to consider changes in bias over time and different approaches to what is considered fair geographically. Things that are considered fair in one country are not going to be considered fair in another country. So it's a very nuanced question around what is bias.
So then it sounds like it involves both making sure that the data that you input is accurate but broad, so that you're not biased because you happen to have received data about cancer survivors and in this set they were all men, so then the system starts to think that only men get cancer or something like that.
Yeah.
And then also there's conscious decisions about bias. Where do we bias in favor of, and where do we make sure we don't bias in favor of?
Exactly. And then do we have different models per geography, because culturally people have different views in one country versus another, where something that is considered biased in one country is not considered biased in another country. For example, in the right to be forgotten under cancer, that is not a worldwide belief that you shouldn't be biased against in insurance quotes because you had cancer 20 years ago.
And who decides on the bias or the non-bias to program into, let's say, an AI program?
That's the challenge. Is it ultimately is going to be without regulation stepping in. So I guess there's regulation of protected classes that are for kind of employment and so on. That you could create laws around bias for protected classes, and the regulator could enforce that. But beyond that, the protection of bias and determining what is bias is going to be in the people that determine what input data goes into the model, which is going to affect the training and so on. So ultimately, it's the creator of the model that is going to decide that, in absence of the regulator deciding it.
And hence you have an EU AI Act, and maybe the best innovation and the most innovative and dynamic innovation comes from creators having a blank page to just get on with it. And when you start to introduce regulation, you immediately start to stifle innovation. But you do bring in those guardrails so that there is some protection where maybe there needs to be protection. But then we will have to wait and see if Europe falls behind, or does it get ahead as a result of having regulations that other jurisdictions don't have.
Exactly. You end up with a sort of regulatory arbitrage, which we're seeing in a number of different ways now. So not just in AI, but in all of the sustainability regulation as well. Like there's a significant difference in views of sustainability in the US and North America versus the EU. And like there's been plenty of reporting around changes in cost of capital for companies running in the EU versus the US because of the requirements on sustainability reporting. So I think there's a very connected world out there, and trying to regulate the ability of tech companies to provide AI solutions inside Europe that are more limited than the ones that are being applied in the US, I think is going to become quite a prominent topic in the next few years, particularly with some very consumer-focused approaches to AI, like Apple Intelligence. Apple Intelligence is going to be launched in the US in December, and as far as I'm aware, is not going to be available in the EU, or at least it's going to be significantly limited in the EU. And we're seeing more and more of that from consumer grade technology that is not being deployed in the EU because of worries about regulation, more so than actual enacted regulation today.
Yeah, and then you marry that with the report that Mario Draghi produced very recently on the future of the EU and the need for competitiveness and for increased productivity, and a concern about the regulatory burden on startups and on innovators. And it's difficult to reconcile that then with legislation that tries to protect but at the same time stifles innovation. So it's quite a difficult balance to try and strike.
It is a very difficult balance. It is hard to see. It is not a black and white matter. There's no complete right and complete wrong. I think you're on a gradient there of, are you protecting people versus stifling innovation or encouraging innovation?
So maybe we wrap up by going back to the first question that we had, which is AI going to take my job? And it sounds to me, Brian, like it's not going to take it today anyway.
I think the worry about AI taking your job depends on the speed of advancement of AI. So the technology that's there today is not going to take your job. Like, very much, it is going to create different types of jobs around reviewing output of AI rather than completely replacing AI. I think whether or not it's going to take everyone's job depends on the speed of enhancement. So if we woke up tomorrow morning and there was an AI that could do everything that you do and everything that I do and everything that absolutely everyone else in the whole world does significantly better than they do, there would more than likely be, like, absolutely everyone would lose their job, unless there's some energy limitation on what it can do. But if it evolves more slowly and the AI that's there today creates more oversight types of output jobs, and then it gets a little better and it starts taking on other things, there will be an adaptability that people will move around into new roles. So I think it depends very much on the speed of AI, the ability, the speed at which the ability grows is going to be the most determining factor. And
I heard a comment at a conference recently that AI is everywhere, right? That the speed of development is linked to the availability of electrical energy.
Yeah, very much so. So, like, and that's on the training side. So all of the electricity is used in training. So it's not in the inference side, in where you're saying, well, what is the next word in this sequence? The big spend is in how do I actually work out what all those probabilities are? It's in the training of the model, which is a more once-off exercise, or not once-off exercise, but it's not every time I invoke the API to invoke the model that I incur a large energy cost. There's quite a minimal energy cost involved in that. The big energy cost is in the training.
And it sounds like, because financial services as an industry has been quite active and early adopters in this, that this is the direction of travel, and that we'll see more and more firms, I guess, willing and maybe happy and expected to use AI, and that this is going to be the way that business is done, if it's not already.
Yeah, so the Financial Times had an article two weekends ago about how 35% of firms had started to get tasks done by AI, and only 5% of those firms had seen changes in employment level. So I would say that there are a lot of companies actively out looking for tasks that they can automate with AI. So I think, if you're inside a financial firm, I would say your best course of action is to do small, agile pilot approaches to AI if you're not already doing it. Don't go in with a big bang. Don't bring in a big consulting firm and spend lots of money. It should be, as I said, how do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant a bite at a time. So have a first few small bites of an elephant to see how it works and to learn from doing that.
Excellent advice. Thank you very much, Brian. Wonderful having the show. Great to kind of chat through some of the concepts that I hear day-to-day firms and individuals grappling with, but not necessarily their natural home to be dealing with AI. So very useful to have that practical explanation. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Danny. It was good to chat.
The Aquest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.